Okay. Ready to dive into something really kind of wild.
I'm game. Shoot.
We're talking hypnotic language this time.
Okay.
Like how words can be used to influence us, persuade us, maybe control us in ways that we don't even realize.
Right.
And all this came from those excerpts you sent over from the Advanced Hypnotic Language Bootcamp PDF.
Yeah, it's fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and it's everywhere, right? It's not just about, like, stage hypnotists swinging pocket
No,
watches.
no, not at all. We're talking everyday conversations, marketing, even like that little voice inside your head.
See, that's what's blowing my mind about this already. Like, I was reading through this PDF, and it's like, oh, yeah, trance states. But I'm thinking, isn't that just for, like, therapy sessions or something?
That's the thing. We're slipping in and out of these states all the time.
Right.
Yeah, like that feeling of being totally engrossed in a movie, so much so that you don't even notice the popcorn falling on the floor. That's a form of trance.
Oh,
Or driving home on autopilot, lost in thought, and suddenly you're pulling into your driveway with no memory of the last few miles. Trance state.
okay. That is freaking me out a little bit, not gonna lie.
Yeah.
Because if those everyday moments are trance states, what else are we tuning out? And where does hypnotic language fit into all of this?
Well, the PDF talks a lot about Milton Erickson, and he was a bit of a rebel in the world of hypnotherapy.
Mm.
He shifted the focus away from the why of people's problems, all that deep-seated childhood trauma stuff, and instead focused on the how of solutions.
So less about digging up the past and more about what rewiring the present?
Exactly. Erickson believed that the unconscious mind wasn't some scary, mysterious place, but a wellspring of potential just waiting to be tapped. He saw it as a storehouse of resources, skills, and experiences that could be used to overcome challenges and achieve goals.
Okay, so instead of being afraid of the unconscious, Erickson was like, let's put it to work. That's a pretty radical idea.
Totally. And it's what makes his approach to hypnotic language so fascinating.
Yeah.
He wasn't about imposing his will, but about guiding individuals to find their own solutions.
Okay, but how do you actually do that? How do words tap into this unconscious power? I mean, it's not like you can just say abracadabra and make someone quit smoking, right?
Well, not usually, no. But it's all about focused attention. Hypnosis and hypnotic language, by extension, work by guiding your focus either inward or outward, narrowing it down like a laser beam.
I get that. It's like when something startling happens and suddenly you're hyper-aware, like the PDF mentioned about car accidents. Everything else fades away and you're just focused on that one intense moment.
Precisely. And in those moments, your brain is actually more receptive to suggestion.
Mm.
Erickson was a master at picking up on these subtle cues.
Mm.
Like, he noticed that right before someone enters a trance, they might blink rapidly, then their eyes might fix on a point, or their muscles might tense and relax.
So he's basically using these natural, almost involuntary responses as a springboard into a deeper state of focus.
Yeah.
But here's where it gets really wild for me. The PDF mentions that in a trance, you actually have more control over things like pain tolerance. How does that work?
That's the power of the unconscious. Think of it this way. Anxiety, which we all know can amplify pain, is itself a form of trance, a negative one. But when you're in a positive trance state induced through hypnosis, you can actually tap into those unconscious resources to manage pain, reduce stress, and even overcome phobias.
So it's like your brain is capable of so much more than we give it credit for, but we're often stuck in these negative thought loops that limit our potential.
Exactly. And hypnotic language can be a powerful tool to break those loops and rewire those patterns.
Okay, that's pretty incredible. So we've got these trance states and we've got this powerful unconscious mind just waiting to be accessed. How does hypnotic language actually work? How do you lead someone down that path? Walk us through it.
Well, it often starts with something called pacing and leading. Essentially, you subtly mirror the person you're interacting with, their tone, their posture, their breathing.
So like if you're talking to someone who's speaking softly and slowly, you would match that energy almost like you're syncing up with their rhythm.
Exactly. And once you've established that rapport, you start gradually shifting one element at a time. Maybe your tone of voice becomes a bit more authoritative, or you slow down your speech just slightly to see if they follow.
It's like you're subtly leading them on a journey, but they're still in the driver's seat, right?
That's the key. It's about guiding, not forcing. And that's where things like vague language come into play. Words like explore, discover, imagine. They seem open-ended, but they subtly direct the listener's focus inward, prompting their unconscious to fill in the blanks.
I see. So instead of saying, think about a relaxing beach, you might say, imagine yourself exploring a tranquil shore. It's still directing their thoughts, but in a way that feels more personal and evocative.
Precisely. And because the listener is actively participating in creating the experience in their mind, it becomes that much more powerful.
That's amazing. It's like you're planting a seed and their unconscious waters it and helps it grow. But didn't Erickson also believe in being direct sometimes? How does that fit in with this whole indirect approach?
You're right. He wasn't afraid to be direct when it was needed. He was all about flexibility, about adapting to each individual and situation. Think of it like this. Sometimes you need a gentle nudge in the right direction, and sometimes you need a good hard push. It all depends on what the person is ready for.
So it's not about sticking rigidly to one technique, but about being present, observing, and knowing which tool to use at the right moment. It's like being a linguistic surgeon.
I like that analogy.
Yeah.
And just like a surgeon uses different instruments for different procedures, a skilled hypnotist will use a variety of techniques to achieve the desired outcome. And the PDF delves into some really interesting ones like truisms.
Okay, truisms. Break that down for me. What are they and how do they work?
A truism is basically a statement that's undeniably true. Think the sun rises in the east or water is wet. You can't really argue with them, right?
Nope, pretty hard to disagree with those.
Exactly. So in the context of hypnotic language, truisms are used to build a chain of agreement. You start with something undeniably true, then link it to another truism and another, creating momentum.
So it's like you're building a staircase of yeses, and by the time you get to the top, the listener is already in that agreeable headspace.
Precisely. They're primed to go along with your suggestions because they've already agreed to a series of statements leading up to it. It's a subtle but powerful way to bypass conscious resistance.
Okay, that's pretty slick. It reminds me of those times you get roped into doing something you weren't planning on. Like someone might say, hey, it's such a beautiful day, want to grab a coffee? And you're like, yeah, sure. And then before you know it, you're helping them paint their garage. You got me on the beautiful day truism, and it was all downhill from there.
And that's exactly how it works. It's about building that yes ladder one step at a time.
Fascinating. So we've got truisms. What other sneaky techniques does this PDF reveal?
Well, it also goes into linking suggestions, which is another way of subtly guiding the listener's thoughts and actions. It's about connecting the observable to the non-observable, the problem, to the solution, making the desired outcome feel like a natural progression.
Okay, give me a real-world example of this. How could this be used in, say, therapy?
Let's say someone is struggling with anxiety. Instead of directly telling them to calm down, a therapist might say something like, as you sit here noticing the feeling of your feet on the ground, you might find that your breathing naturally begins to slow down.
Okay, I see what you mean. You're linking the observable act of feeling their feet on the ground to the desired outcome of slower breathing, which is often associated with a calmer state.
Exactly. It's a way of indirectly suggesting a change in state without directly confronting the anxiety head-on, which can sometimes make it worse.
It's like you're speaking directly to the unconscious, bypassing those conscious defense mechanisms that tend to pop up when we feel threatened or challenged.
Precisely. And the PDF also talks about something really interesting, the power of the word because. Studies have shown that people are more likely to comply with a request if you simply add the word because and a reason, even if the reason is totally flimsy.
Come on. Really, we're that easily swayed. Give me an example.
Okay, imagine you're in line for the copier and someone comes up to you and says, excuse me, I have 5 pages. Can I go ahead of you because I'm in a rush? Even though their reason is pretty vague, you're more likely to comply than if they just said, can I go ahead of you?
You know what? You're totally right. I've fallen for that myself. It's like our brains just hear that word because and automatically assume there must be a good reason even if we don't stop to think about it. It's like a mental shortcut.
Exactly. It highlights how much of our communication is processed unconsciously below the level of conscious awareness.
Okay, this is getting a little creepy even for me, but also fascinating. So we've got these subtle techniques like truisms and linking suggestions, and then we've got the almost magical power of because. The PDF calls some of these advanced patterns. What else falls under that category?
Well, it also gets into presuppositions, which are essentially assumptions embedded in the way you phrase something. They're not if, but when. For instance, before we begin, already assumes the listener will be hypnotized, subtly shaping their expectations.
It's like you're setting the stage, creating an expectation that something is going to happen even before it actually does.
Precisely. It's about subtly influencing someone's perception of reality.
I'm starting to realize that hypnotic language is a lot like magic creating illusions with words. What about other advanced patterns?
Another powerful one is the double bind. Essentially, you present 2 options, but both options lead to the desired outcome. The classic example is, would you prefer to relax in the chair or on the couch? Either way, you're suggesting relaxation.
Sneaky. I love it. It's like you're giving the illusion of choice, but no matter which path they choose, it leads to the same destination. It reminds me of those choose-your-own-adventure books I used to read as a kid. No matter what choice you made, you always ended up back on track with the main storyline.
Exactly. It's a brilliant way to influence someone's decision-making process without them even realizing it. And the more these techniques are practiced and refined, the more seamless and impactful they become.
Which is a bit unnerving when you think about it. If this stuff is all around us, how do we even begin to recognize it, let alone resist it? Give us some hope here.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? How do we navigate a world just saturated with persuasive language? Designed to influence our choices at every turn.
It's like we're swimming in a sea of subtle suggestions, and we only just now notice that we're wet.
Exactly.
And if we're being honest with ourselves, how many times have we been influenced without even realizing it? It's a little unsettling, to say the least.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But awareness is the first step, right? Like, start paying attention to the language that's being used in everyday life. Those catchy slogans in advertising, the way politicians frame their arguments, even the, seemingly harmless phrases that salespeople use. It's all designed to influence us on a subconscious level.
Okay, so be more mindful of the language around us. But what specifically should we be listening for?
Well, we've talked about some of them: truisms, presuppositions, embedded commands, that sneaky little because.
Once you start to recognize these patterns, you'll be amazed at how often they pop up. It's like suddenly seeing the Matrix.
Okay, so we're more aware.
Mm.
But awareness alone doesn't make us immune to these techniques, right? How do we actually resist their influence? It feels like once you see it, you can't unsee it. You're right, it's not about becoming immune. It's more about becoming more conscious.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing when these techniques are being used and then making a conscious choice about how we want to respond. Do we go along with it? Do we challenge it? Or do we simply choose to disengage? The power is in our hands, even if it doesn't always feel that way.
So instead of being passively influenced, we become active participants in the conversation, even if that conversation is just happening in our own heads.
Exactly. And that includes the language that we use when we talk to ourselves. Pay attention to that inner critic, those negative self-talk patterns, the I can'ts and the I should haves. That's often hypnotic language that we've internalized over the years, shaping our beliefs about ourselves and the world around us.
It's like we've unknowingly hypnotized ourselves with limiting beliefs.
Precisely.
Mm.
But just as we can learn to recognize and resist external hypnotic language, we can also reprogram those internal scripts. We can choose to focus on more empowering, supportive self-talk.
So it's about becoming more mindful of the messages that we're feeding ourselves, both from the outside world and from within. But how do we actually make those changes? How do we go from being influenced to being influential in our own lives?
It's an ongoing process, and there's no magic bullet. But one powerful tool is reframing. When you notice yourself being influenced by hypnotic language, stop and reframe the message. For example, let's say you're constantly bombarded with ads telling you that you need the latest gadget to be happy.
Oh, I know those ads. They get me every time.
Right. They're designed to. But instead of buying into that message, you can reframe it. You can ask yourself, do I really need this to be happy? What truly brings me joy? It's about questioning the assumptions, challenging the truisms, and coming up with your own answers.
It's like taking back control of the narrative, writing our own stories instead of letting others write them for us.
Exactly. And the more we practice this, the more discerning we become. We become more conscious consumers of information, more aware of the persuasive forces at play, and more empowered to make choices that align with our values and our goals.
That's a powerful message. So it's not about rejecting hypnotic language altogether. It's about understanding its power both for good and for ill, and learning to wield it consciously and ethically.
Well said. And who knows? As we become more aware of these subtle nuances of language and persuasion, we might even find ourselves becoming more persuasive communicators ourselves.
Now that's a thought. From being hypnotized to being the hypnotist. Well, listeners, there you have it. A deep dive into the fascinating and sometimes unsettling world of hypnotic language. Remember, pay attention to the words, question the assumptions, and never underestimate the power of language to shape your reality.
Beautifully said. It's been a pleasure diving deep with you.
And to our listeners, thanks for joining us on this mind-bending journey. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep those brains buzzing.